Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. So today we have this case studies workshop, which is organized by the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems Community, formerly known as the Green Commodities Community. So today we will present a policy reform tool, which is called Targeted Scenario Analysis. This tool was developed by UNDP to respond to the growing demand from decision makers and stakeholders for effective policy relevant economic analysis tools to advance national sustainable development goals. So today we have with us Marlon Flores, whom I would like to welcome warmly. Marlon is the lead senior technical advisor for TSA with the FACS team at UNDP. Today Marlon will present to us and give us an overview of what is TSA and how it can be applied, and what are the initial results of the application of TSA. But more importantly, as today we have a case studies workshop, we will also hear from national level practitioners about their experiences of applying this tool in their national contexts. So we will have an example from Colombia on the livestock. We will have an example from Liberia on palm oil, and an example from Peru on cacao. And last thing, a few logistical notes. So we are recording this workshop, and also, as you will see, we are providing interpretation. So you can listen to this workshop in Spanish if you need so, and some presentations will be done in Spanish. So then if you need to listen to them in English, you will be able to do that. So again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and over to you, Marlon.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Welcome everyone. We're very happy to have this webinar, and let's get into business. So to start with, we'd like to show you a video of our senior economist, which is Mr. Francisco Alpizar, which teaches. He's a professor at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and it's the lead author of the methodology for which many of us and many economists contributed. He's the lead author, and he has some general and very important remarks about the value of TSA and how it can be used. And that will be followed by a more detailed but short, very brief presentation on target scenario analysis that I will deliver. Let's move on then. Thank you very much, and welcome again, everybody. We're very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
So I'm a behavioral economist, and as such, I take a perspective that is centered on individual decisions, either as households or individuals, or as owners of a factory, a firm, a company. And I believe those decisions, although they are hard to change, they can be changed. From an economic perspective, there are three things that we can do to change those decisions. The first one is that the prices of commodities and inputs should reflect the true costs to society, not just the immediate cost of producing them, but also the environmental impact that the production of those goods and services carries for society. Second, we need to make sure that we use a long-term planning horizon. Frankly, decisions are too short-term, too narrow, too short-sighted. And as such, we do not take into account the long-term impact of our actions. And third, we need to recognize that some goods are common goods or public goods. This means that they don't belong to one person or one company, but they belong to humanity as a whole. The atmosphere, the oceans, wetlands, forest. We need to recognize that those are very important for us, and we need to put special attention in the design of institutions and governance standards that are based, for example, on precautionary safeguards. There are several things that need to be done. So you can do this at the national level. For example, when you are taking, let's say, a national perspective, they can be done at the regional level, or they can be done at the company or even at the household level. And for each and every one of those decisions, we need a careful analysis of what is the current situation and how does this current situation will look in the future, and what will be the alternative situation. And this we call a business as usual scenario, or let's call it sustainable ecosystem management scenario. And when you compare one against the other with a long-term perspective and focusing on the relevant indicators for the decision makers, so the things that the decision maker cares for, then you can provide a better picture of the decision that is in front of us. And that's what targeted scenario analysis. It is a targeted scenario construction of business as usual versus sustainable ecosystem management for the outcomes that are relevant for the decision maker. And when that is done, in principle, the decision maker can have a very powerful decision tool, because with that evidence, he or she is going to be able to make an informed and evidence-based decision. So if we put ourselves in the feet of a decision maker that is, for example, deciding whether to implement a series of policies to make the agricultural sector more sustainable, for example. Of course, the business as usual scenario is if you continue with the practices, the current practices, and so on and so forth. A sustainable ecosystem management scenario will be one in which you change a series of practices, a series of actions, and with that, in principle, you get a change in the outcomes. Say, for example, that you're producing pineapples, and you can produce pineapples under a business as usual scenario with impact on the surrounding land, agrochemicals, land deforestation, land use change, and so on and so forth. Competing diseases, so diseases that spread to the surrounding areas. But of course, this is something that is viable only for a very short period of time. Now, a decision maker might ask, so what is the alternative? What is the alternative scenario? And if you build that scenario, it might be that this productive land is going to last longer, markets are going to be more willing to receive your product, and so on and so forth. Through UNDP's application of the targeted scenario analysis methodology, you can really construct these two scenarios carefully. Now, the construction of these scenarios depart from a close interaction with the decision maker. So the first thing that should be asked is, so you as decision maker, what is it that you care about? Is it employment? Is it taxes? Is it production? Is it that you want to reduce social unrest? And based on that, the analyst should construct the scenario as a whole. Two targeted scenario analysis that I particularly care about are both in agriculture. One is the production of livestock, of meat and milk under standard conditions. And the other one is the production of milk under silvopastoral systems. This is two scenarios, one in which the cow basically is walking on the land, which has implications for ecosystem services, the amount of land that is needed, and so on and so forth. And silvopastoral systems, you combine that with trees and shrubs, and you provide feed to the cattle so that it's not always outside. And by that, you can significantly reduce the let's say, the footprint of meat production on your own land, thereby generating higher profits, higher yield, and also more sustainable outcomes. So that's TSA that I particularly like. And the other one is this one that I mentioned on pineapple, where we compared a business as usual scenario against a series of policies that were being considered by the Costa Rican government, Costa Rica being one of the biggest producers of pineapple. So the government was considered a series of policies, and we compare one against the other. So trying to explore what are the ups and downs of this new policies. And I think those are particularly strong. TSA has been applied in the context of cacao production, or palm oil production, also livestock in several countries, Paraguay and others. So it is a very, in a way, it's a method that can be applied to very many different levels, and also what I mentioned about silvopastoral systems, you can do this analysis at the level of the farm, but you can also ask yourself what happens if you plan at a higher level, let's say a whole region or a whole landscape. I think when it comes to using this targeted scenario analysis, I would like to stress the fact that this is a way of organizing information. It's not necessarily that we are going to do something that is completely new, because yeah, it has a part of cost-benefit analysis, it has a part of social cost-benefit analysis, it has a part of economic valuation, feasibility analysis, and so on and so forth. What is really cool about targeted scenario analysis is that it puts all these things together in a compelling message for the decision maker. So in a way, it's not just about doing things differently, it's about packaging the things that you do in a way that makes information much easily available to the decision maker. Frequently, when we are producing evidence, we focus so much on producing the evidence that we forget that the communication of that evidence is as important, or more important actually. And targeted scenario analysis is a way of bridging that gap. I think that's very important for UNDP and also for other institutions that care about science for impact. Science for impact requires much more than just the science. It requires the actual communication of science in a suitable way.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much for the Francisco's video. I think that was very, very eye-opening and provoking for everyone participating. So let's move to the next segment, which is the leveling the ground for policy reform presentation that's coming next. Yes, thank you so much. And let's look very quickly at the content of this presentation, which it shows the next two parts of the webinar. So we're moving into part one of the content, which is we're going to show you what is TSA, a little bit about really fly over the 5-step approach of TSA, how TSA support decision making, how we convert economic data into policy reform recommendations, the value added of TSA, and something very important, how to engage projects in TSA. We have UNDP has a large portfolio of projects in different programmatic areas, and a quick overview of what has happened to TSA in recent years. And then we're going to move to the case study section. So let's move on. Next slide, please. So as this is to emphasize what Francisco just said, TSA is a policy reform tool that uses excuse me, economic scenario analysis to respond to a public or private decision maker question. And that is whether it's worth investing in improving long-term ecosystem services and obtain sustainable and profitable sector productivity. Remember this question that's very important, and we're going to have it present along this short presentation. Next slide, please. So continuing on what is TSA, you can see there two explanations. I want to make emphasis on the last point of this slide, which is literal C in the second part, which says it responds to the decision maker's objective. So in every step, particularly during the first step of TSA, we really need the opinion, views, and consider the needs of the decision maker. The objective, the scope, all the different elements of TSA cannot be done without the decision maker's participation. Regarding the BAU scenario, it's the dynamic status quo in which decisions makers continue on their current path without accounting for the value of ecosystem services. Under BAU, there's high environmental impacts and low levels of sustainability. There are high earnings levels in the short term, and over the long term, there's a reduction in the social and private benefits as ecosystems degrade. The same scenario, on the other hand, involves a change in the status quo in which actions are taken to reduce or reverse the negative effects of BAU on the relevant ecosystems. Production and consumption activities take into account the role of ecosystems, hence production and consumption is not threatened by degradation of the natural resource base. Next slide, please. Here you can see the 5 steps of TSA. Number 1 is defining the client purpose and scope, defining the BAU and SEM interventions. Number 3 is selecting the criteria and indicators. Number 4, constructing the BAU and SEM scenarios and making the recommendation. I would say, based on the experience of being involved in over 20 TSAs in the last 10 years or more, that for me, step 1, it's really what's defined the success or the failure of a TSA. Remember that the success of a TSA is not coming to the most accurate and believable numbers. Yes, we aim for that. That is indispensable for our studies. But what is important is that that data is transferred into policy reform, and then we need to communicate, as Francisco said. But we also need the decision maker fully engaged, because he or she will be the person, the lead agent for change. So without the involvement of the decision maker in step 1, the following step will be just an economic analysis that will give you some numbers, and that will be the end of it. TSA wants to change that dynamic and really get to the point where policy reform takes place. Next slide, please. So during step 1, there are 3 big elements that collide there. So it's decision makers' objective. That for me, it's the most important thing that should be taken into consideration. We have to look at the policy loopholes that exist on the targeted sector. Let's talk about agriculture or livestock for now. And then based on those policy loopholes, then what do we expect from the decision maker? What does the decision maker wants to do? And that will be reflected in the policy questions that the TSA will respond to. So remember that the TSA is a tool for policy reform and will give answer to policy questions using economic evidence-based data. And that all these elements together make the TSA's objective and scope. Next slide, please. So step 2, it's defining the baseline and the same intervention. And here are some guiding questions. I'm not going to read the questions. I'm going to read the questions for you. But what is important here is that the analyst who is taking the lead at the TSA study, obviously the TSA team implementing the TSA is composed by international and national and government stakeholders. So these are the questions that you need to look at when you are defining the BAU and SEM scenarios. Defining the BAU scenario, obviously, it's not easy in general terms, but you need some data to back up those definitions. And in the next slide, please, we're going to see an example of a very general depiction of BAO baseline and the SEM intervention for the agriculture and livestock sectors. Remember that we've done several different types of TSAs, ranging from agriculture, livestock. We have done illegal wildlife trade, mining, tourism, protected areas. So there's a wide range of applications for TSA. So this is just an example of the things that one will consider under BAO and what should be looking under SEM. So the purpose of the TSA study is to facilitate the transition from the BAO scenario to the SEM scenario. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide. Selecting the criteria and indicators. Here I have put some sample criteria. What is important here is to analyze the criteria. So in terms of financial criteria, frequently the main consideration when assessing a course of action, for example, a private firm might be trying to maximize profits, whereas a public service provider, such as water utilities, power companies, might be simply seeking to recover costs. Those indicators that you see there are related to financial indicators, looking at profits, looking at cost recovery, breaking even. Economic indicators are more complex and perhaps the most important from the policy standpoint. A decision maker will be more interested in ensuring that projects or policies that will do the greatest good for the greatest number of people are taken. So in such situation, the analysis would involve an assessment of net benefits that benefit a larger group of the society, not just financial revenues or costs, as in the case of the financial indicators. Employment, it's a very political and a very important indicator because politicians are, in most cases, decision makers. Some are more technical, some other are less technical, but during a political campaign, there's a lot of promises about employment, improving living standards, and so on and so forth. But employment, therefore, it's very important in our TSA analysis. So some decision makers might be most interested in changes in levels of employment that result from a certain course of action and policy. So employment indicators are very useful because we're discussing TSA results with decision makers, politicians that could use this as I said, as evidence-based economic data, accurate data that can be shared with their constituencies. Equity and fairness. Equity is defined as people or groups that in the same circumstances are treated equally, and also that different groups like, for example, low income and high income households should be treated differently according to the different circumstances. Fairness is a bit more difficult to define, but fairness is determined by perhaps moral and ethical values for what is fair is often, as we said in the methodology, in the eye of the beholder. So, but the important message here for you is that we need to use criteria. A TSA needs criteria, which is picked and chosen by the decision maker, criteria and indicators that can be used by the decision maker to reform a management or investment policy to ensure long-term ecosystem service and sustainable sector productivity. So we need to ask the decision maker always throughout the TSA study, always keep asking the decision maker if we're on the right track. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide. Step 4 is constructing the BAO and SEM scenarios. Here's where more of the economic analysis, the statistical analysis comes into. So here are 4 suggestions that are important for the construction of the scenarios, looking at how ecosystem services will be affected by change, considering BAU and SEM, how changes in ecosystem services affect the chosen indicators. Remember, you compare indicators or use or analyzing on a standalone basis, but not on a standalone basis, always linked to ecosystems, but you can compare soil erosion, for example, as it's written here, with net profits, net benefits, and jobs. We also look at how does that relationship changes over time. And as Francisco said before, we need to choose the relevant valuation method when the moment comes that we need to carry out a specific analysis on a determined indicator. Let's move on, please. So here I'm going to share with you some shots of the graphs that are produced in a targeted scenario analysis. I'm not going to explain all of them, but I'm going to quickly explain the one that is within the red box. This is the sustainable livestock TSA in the Yari savannas in the municipalities of Macarena and San Vicente de Caguán in Colombia, done recently in 2001. So when we look at the number of full-time jobs, the study concluded that at the regional level, the model shows that for the 5,587 farms in the study area, the average annual employment generated in BAU is about 8,800 full-time equivalent jobs, and in the SEM is slightly higher at 9,931, with the difference that in 15 years, it will be 1,834 jobs in favor of SEM. Not switching to SEM implies a loss of 17,000 potential one-day jobs over a period of 15 years. So this is the kind of information that comes out with a TSA as a result of improving ecosystem management in the livestock sector. So it's a different type of information packaged in a different way. And we need to consider that in this region, according to the Department of Statistics of Colombia, jobs are based on agricultural minimum wages, which are below the minimum wage. So these jobs are very, very precarious. The TSA in Colombia recommended policy reforms to introduce financial mechanisms to support deforestation pre-supply chains in the sector, including an agricultural promotion fund and a detailed PS scheme. Also create incentives for transformation through financial mechanisms detailing fundable activities and the financial conditions for this. Next slide, please. Here we have a total different sector, TSA on artisanal and small-scale gold mining in Ecuador. And the important thing here is that the TSA, we're going to look at the royalties from the processing plants. The TSA revealed that there were different levels of SEM improvement. For example, income for small-scale miners, net profits for processing plants, and royalties from the state. So it's a combination of financial and economic indicators. Since royalties depend on the profits of the processing plants, the first year, we can see in the graph that in the first year, there are no royalties because it is expected that the plants may have losses in that period. It's a transition period with required investment for the improvement of the plants. Therefore, there will be a decrease in income. However, as of the third year, the royalty level of the SEM scenario is equal to the BAU, and at the end of a 10-year period, it increases to close to 90%. So it's a huge impact of shifting from BAU to SEM. The policy recommendations of this study refer to invest to upgrading the processing plants to increase processing capacity and move miners processing to the plants, and therefore reduce, for example, the pollution caused by mercury, by the use of mercury. Mercury is used by the small farmers. If they do the processing of the raw material, they can reduce pollution, mercury pollution, by 80%. That's a huge number. Also, to increase the capacity of the central bank for purchasing gold from the processing plants above $5 million. As you see, these are numbers that are transferred into policy recommendations and can be used by decision makers, not for their own internal decision of pushing for a policy, but to negotiate with their counterparts, like, for example, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, of the Ministry of Hacienda, in which budget decisions take place. For example, we have in the Ministry of Hacienda, we have sectorialists that are responsible for the sector budget allocations. And it's important to have that high level political and technical dialogue with these people. Thank you. Next, let's go to the last slides. Step 5 is about providing this evidence and this policy reform. I have already mentioned the policy reforms in these two cases, but consider here that the team, the TSA team, should know the clients very well in order to best present the results. Some decision makers prefer the analyst opinions, others prefer to debate with their advisors, others look at the factual elements of the TSA to make decisions. But in some, it's important that in all cases, TSA will present the results of all selected indicators with the respective policy links. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide. So when we do a TSA, timing is very important here. So consider that there's a significant delay, for example, from the project formulation to the approval until the implementation starts. It could take over 2 years in the case of GF projects. We need to ensure that the targeted policies are still relevant and on the government's agenda. There should be a real advance on how the sector's environmental problem is perceived. So there should be some sense of a problem clearly identified by the public and by the decision makers. So the TSA team could then support setting and advancing the agenda and providing evidence-based economic data to analyze different policy options. Subsequently, and in response to the decision makers' objectives, provide the relevant policy recommendations to support decision-making. TSA, therefore, could increase the relevance of the environmental problem, sector environmental problem, and facilitate decision-making. So timing is critical. It is unlikely that a TSA is successful if there is no policy under government scrutiny. Remember that TSA is not a solution looking for a problem. It's a solution to an existing problem. Click on the next slide, and then it will come here. It shows you where is the areas where the TSA fits in the policy reform cycle, which is depicted in the graph. Thank you. Let's move to the final slides. Yeah. So the value added of TSA, we look at it at 3 levels: at country level, institutional, technical capacity, funding donors, and scalability. As you can see in this slide, the benefits of TSA, the value added of TSA really concentrates on the first level, which is the country level, and the client level, which it can improve or increase a range of elements that you can see in this slide. Thank you. Let's move on. So let's look at the portfolio. These are final slides here. Let me just start saying that between 2012 and 2017, there were about 6 pilot TSA studies that were completed in the Republic of Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Mongolia, Kosovo, and Romania. And they were sponsored mainly by the UNDP GF and the WWF Caucasus Policy Program. Today, you're looking at a table which contains about 28 TSA studies between 2017 and 2024. So it's planned for the next 2 years. 9 of these studies are completed. 11 are in an advanced planning stage, meaning close to enter the procurement phase. And we have 7 TSA right now ongoing. And those are the ones you see marked in yellow. So the purpose of sharing this slide with you is to showing you that TSA is increasing its traction. So we are very encouraged by this result and by the uptake of countries and projects of TSA. Thank you. Next slide. So here are some consideration, and this is the last slide. How to engage TSAs in a project. So it's a list of recommendations. The list is long. I don't want to read it. Just want to say that there are challenges here. For example, challenging managing their relations with the governments. It's not easy to maintain a fluent and continuous business relationship with the government when we have situations, particularly in Latin America or in developing countries where governments are unstable and there's a lot of turnaround, government changes, sometimes the minister changes every 6 months or less. So it's very difficult to maintain these dialogues. But here you can see that there's ample opportunity. If we look at all these considerations, we can really improve and increase the application of TSA. Thank you. And with that, I think there's only one more slide. Yeah, no more slides. I conclude the presentation. Thank you so much. And the following steps, we'll be looking at the case studies.
Thank you, Marlon. So now indeed we will move into the case studies. First of all, we will have a brief presentation from Miguel Mejia from Colombia on the experience of applying TSA in the livestock sector. And if I understand correctly, Miguel will do his presentation in Spanish. So in case you need the translation, just click below on the channel to listen to it in English. So welcome, Miguel.
Hola, muy buenos días para todas y todos. Buenos días para Marlon, para Sandra, que hemos tenido la posibilidad en Colombia de compartir con ellos varias iniciativas regionales que se han implementado en el país a través del proyecto Amazonía Sostenible para la Paz, del cual soy coordinador. Creo que Francisco y Marlon ya han explicado, digamos, con suficiencia todos los componentes metodológicos de estos estudios. Y en el caso colombiano, pues yo quisiera indicar la relevancia que ha tenido para nosotros el estudio por su nivel de practicidad y funcionalidad. En Colombia estamos nosotros abordando una problemática bien importante que tiene que ver con los usos del suelo de la Amazonía. Y el estudio TSA pues, fue muy oportuno para poder validar de alguna manera los componentes de la apuesta metodológica, precisamente como lo indicaba Francisco, de cómo poder hacer una gestión de ecosistemas y que estos estudios contribuyan a mostrar la viabilidad de las alternativas. Bien, pues este estudio en el caso colombiano se realizó para las sabanas del Yarí, que están ubicadas en la Amazonía colombiana. No sé si ven mi cursor, pero aquí en el mapa al costado izquierdo van a poder identificar la subregión donde se encuentra ubicada las sabanas del Yarí y allí está inmerso, digamos, en un ecosistema de la región amazónica colombiana de 2 departamentos, el Meta y el Caquetá. El estudio abordó sistemas productivos y análisis de esta región en relación con la ganadería y el uso del suelo en la Amazonía colombiana, en esta subregión particularmente. Adelante. Las preguntas que nosotros abordamos para este estudio, pues básicamente tenían que ver con la necesidad de evidenciar cuál es la oportunidad que tiene los tomadores de decisiones, en este caso Los beneficiarios del estudio fueron autoridades ambientales del sector de agricultura. También fue beneficiario de este estudio el Ministerio de Agricultura y Desarrollo Rural de Colombia y las autoridades ambientales de la región, quienes necesariamente debían comprender si para reducir los impactos que genera la deforestación podríamos tener, digamos, una alternativa en el trabajo con la economía ganadera y con las ganaderías de esta región. Entonces, era validar de alguna manera si existía una justificación económica para poder invertir en esa cadena productiva, en la ganadería sostenible y qué beneficios eso tendría. Creo que ya Marlon explicó en el ciclo y las fases de la metodología qué relevancia tiene este tipo de estudios para los tomadores de decisiones. Las preguntas que acompañaron además este estudio pues era saber bajo esos escenarios, Bausen, cuáles son las ganancias o las pérdidas que tenían, cuáles son las que se esperan, digamos, bajo este nuevo escenario y cuál es el costo de estimación de cambiar de alternativa. Queremos precisar que no solo pues nosotros abordamos el tema de ganadería sostenible en función de lo que se conoce comúnmente como los silvopastoriles, sino la propuesta nuestra, digamos, de abordaje en la implementación del proyecto tiene que ver con un enfoque de diseño de paisajes productivos sostenibles. Y esos diseños de paisajes productivos sostenibles no incorporan solo el tema de silvopastoriles, sino que incorporan un manejo de alternativas, de herramientas de manejo del paisaje a través de la planificación adaptativa predial en función del agua. Bueno, y por eso otra de las preguntas era cuál era el impacto económico, digamos, de establecer esos instrumentos financieros que podrían generarse a partir de identificar la viabilidad de la política, en este caso de reconversión productiva. Adelante. Bueno, el estudio pues nos deja como conclusiones y como resultados. Las respuestas obviamente es ese escenario de continuar en un BAU que deforesta 52.000 hectáreas a un costo de 755 millones de pesos colombianos. Tasamos también en parte algunos escenarios con servicios ambientales y una reducción de ingresos de un 19%. Esto es lo que ocurre hoy, como están las cosas bajo sistemas ganaderos. En este caso analizamos incluso fue predios pequeños y medianos, no analizamos incluso la ganadería extensiva de gran escala, sino lo que aborda el proyecto, que son sistemas productivos de pequeña y mediana escala. Lo que observamos es que en un escenario SEM se puede incrementar la productividad, los empleos y los ingresos. Ya creo que estos resultados también Marlon los presentó, digamos, como ejemplo en detalle, ¿cierto? Y lo que evita en deforestación son 35.000 hectáreas en un escenario de 10 años. Y la estimación, digamos, de cambiar entre uno y otro son 78 millones de dólares americanos para 5.587 familias que están bajo ese sistema, tipo de sistema productivo pequeño y mediano. Y obviamente el impacto del establecimiento de los instrumentos, los mecanismos financieros para apoyar este tipo de inversiones, ¿cierto? En ese caso, pues, es evidente que no solo se trata de una política de reconversión productiva silvopastoril, como el ejemplo que ponía Francisco, sino que en este caso estamos hablando de diseño de paisajes productivos sostenibles y de la planificación predial adaptativa, que es como nosotros la denominamos en la metodología del proyecto. Y como les digo, esa planificación predial, esa planeación de fincas, predios o parcelas, está en función de el agua, ¿cierto? Como un elemento de adaptación y de reducción de impactos y presiones sobre los bosques y los ecosistemas. Adelante. Y ya, digamos, en el ciclo, digamos, de esta metodología, como lo explicaba Marlon, ya para el tema de diseño de la política, tuvimos un escenario muy afortunado este año, y es que se adoptó la política de ganadería sostenible en el país. Y esa política de ganadería sostenible estaba precisamente concertada entre los dos sectores beneficiarios de este proyecto, de este estudio, que son el Ministerio de Agricultura, como les menciono, y el Ministerio de Ambiente. Esa política no es resultado de este estudio. Digo yo que es un contexto afortunado porque mientras estábamos haciendo el estudio, se estaba formulando esta política y una vez sale, el estudio es soporte fundamental para que la política se pueda llevar a instancias municipales, por ejemplo, como ya lo estamos haciendo, y que puedan ser adoptadas por los municipios como una estrategia, digamos, de adaptación al cambio climático, de gestión, digamos, del cambio climático y de contención de la deforestación. En Colombia, los mayores impactos de emisiones están por el sector afolu, ustedes lo saben. Y en este caso, pues la ganadería en el país representa más del 60%, digamos, de esas emisiones. Esa es, digamos, como la pertinencia de este instrumento de política para que se pueda implementar a nivel regional estos lineamientos. En ese proceso estamos ya de trabajo con los dos municipios donde se realizaron los estudios. Yo dejaría hasta allí para poder tener preguntas si es necesario.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. I would suggest now that we move on to the presentation of Dorsla Fakarti from Liberia. And if we have any minutes left at the end, we can take some questions. But colleagues, feel free to address any questions you have already in the chat box. This way we can compile them, and if we won't have the time at the end, we can send you the responses via email. So welcome, Dorsla, and over to you.
Well, let me say thank you, and I'm happy to be a part of this. Are you going to put the presentation on, or you want me to do that?
Thank you, Dorsla. Can you share your screen kindly?
Okay, can you all see?
Yes. Can you please add it into presentation mode?
Okay, 1 minute.
Thank you, that's great.
Okay, let me say thank you and for having me being a part of this. I'm really grateful. Okay, so let me also thank my colleague who presented earlier. I think the experiences are great from country to country. So for the case of Liberia, you see what the key objective was. But there's a little background to this because locals felt strongly, that agriculture through palm oil production was a key driver for deforestation. And then there were also issues around land use. Locals felt that when companies come in, it's just about taking their land from them. And then there's destruction to ecosystem. So before coming up with our TSA, there was a root cause study to find out, some of the root causes with respect to deforestation. This was complemented by our TSA. So if you see from the presentation slide, the TSA objective is there, but then what were the key policy questions for us? So what we wanted to know was that whether or not there are financial benefits if we adhere to RSPO sustainability requirements, and this could help avoid deforestation. So that's one. The second aspect was whether there are economic gains and losses in terms of employment, because from the side of government is more like revenue concerns, and then whether requiring to RSPO standards, also we could avoid deforestation, but then at the same time gain on the revenue side. And then lastly, what is the net benefit, or what are the net benefits if we're to invest, for example, in forest conservation within the palm oil concession areas, and then looking at protection of ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration and biodiversity maintenance. So these were the key policy questions. So then in terms of policy response to these key questions, as you can see, 1 minute. So, sorry, I'm trying to. Okay. So if you see from the TSA recommendations, the first one they talk about maximizing total value generated by palm oil. And our government should maintain a commitment to requiring concessionaires abide by RSPO principles and criteria. By this, they meant that there should be commitment reflected in concession agreements, and then we should also push for executive orders through our Ministry of Agriculture, to make sure this commitment is firm, especially when it's coming from the office of the president. And then the second one talks about the national interpretation process for RSPO principles and criteria, be concluded to address the issue of secondary forest, in a way that is appropriate for high forest, low deforestation, like in lead development countries, they practice, for example, 50% of secondary forest to be maintained after protecting all primary forests and high carbon forest stock and high concentration values. Okay, and then lastly, that the government working with NGO partners, concessionaires and communities, we should all redouble our effort looking at a workable model for small oil palm development, looking at agro schemes, smallholder farmers, and how they can have access to finances for startup. Also, part of this, okay, sorry. Sorry, I'm trying to go to the next slide.
Thanks, Dorsla. Perhaps if you can go down, yeah, perfect.
Okay. Then also, we're looking at the enormous benefits accruing to concessionaires if they were to come under a sustainable palm oil scenario, relative to the business as usual in the interest of both the concessionaire and then smallholders in Liberia. And then lastly, it's about government working with partners, doubling their efforts to advance the RSPO framework and pay particular attention to issues like compensation, avoiding emissions, from deforestation through sustainable palm oil development. So there were follow-up actions, after this whole TSA study. And if you can see from the slide, the first one was that our Ministry of Agriculture should work with the National Oil Palm Platform of Liberia to designate a subcommittee that could draft a policy paper. I mean, on this, there's no progress on this yet. One of the things affecting this was changing leadership, because the person leading this was the head of the National Investment Commission, but then he got changed by the president. So this created some delays because, you know, as new people come in, it takes time for them to learn. It takes time for them to understand the issue. So this created, you know, so much delay. And then for our Ministry of Agriculture, you know, policy position paper subcommittee to invite input from the consultant on the RSPO and national interpretation process to incorporate national interpretation into policy position. For this, there's little progress because we acceded to the RSPO. So we're trying to conform to all of the requirements, get things set up for the oil palm sector. So this is making some little progress bit by bit, because the Ministry of Agriculture is taking the lead. And then the NOPO, the Oil Palm Platform of Liberia Subcommittee, should advance the whole issue of smallholder and outgrower models with the help of CI and IDH to facilitate the subcommittee effort. There's little progress on this because there were a series of meetings held with big companies, with smallholder farmers, you know, with a view of finding entry points to see how this issue of advancing smallholder farmers and outgrower schemes, you know, can make some progress. So there were 3 different regional consultations held, you know, the reports are there. And so, you know, the ministry will also have to take this on. And then using the TSA analytical framework, the CI, the IDH, and then the MPOI, the Manure Palm Oil, you know, which more like it's a private entity, you know, can try to rationalize and then have a corporate share of blended financing model developed. On this one, also, there's no progress yet because of, at some point in time, the GGP came to an end. The CI was there, but then they pick up on the follow. IDH, for some reason, they also couldn't move forward. You know, there were issues then with Manure Palm Oil. They were also taking on from Sami Dhabi at the time. And so, I mean, everything just fell back, you know, and there was no progress. And then the Ministry of Agriculture and our Forestry agency developed an agenda for joint session of RARE Plus and technical working group, you know, along with the NOPO for review of the members by the 2 bodies. So we've been trying as UNDP to see how we could bring the 2 together. We've not succeeded yet. We've just started making little progress just before the COP27. These officials had to leave, so they are now back in town. So there's something we'll also pick up from because there's no progress yet. And then the UNDP and CI to develop TOR for technical consultancy to further develop the TSA modeling framework. Also, we've not made any progress on this yet because, like I said, immediately the GGP came to a close. You know, I mean, there was not much commitment again, you know, especially from the CI end, but we're still working with them to see how we can take this through, especially working with the ministry that has taken over leadership and has shown enough enthusiasm to carry this work further. So this is where we are. And I'd just like to thank you for the time provided me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorsla. I am mindful of time, so I wanted to check if there are any questions. Otherwise, for those of you who have still a couple of minutes and can stay with us, we still have one intervention from Diana Rivera from Peru. It is a video actually, so that can be also sent with the email, which will go out after the workshop. I actually see a question in the chat box from Kingsley. So how do you ensure that the recommendations from the TSA are really implemented? Marlon, would you like to?
Yes, yes, of course. Thank you, and thank you for the question. That is the $5 million question, really. There are different options, but the most important thing is that there's ownership of the TSA study. As I said in the beginning, with the decision maker, you have to define the policy questions. You have to define find the policy loopholes that are going to be addressed by the TSA, so that this person, the decision maker, can use the results of the TSA. And then that's one aspect, and perhaps it's, in my opinion, the aspect which we need to strengthen the TSAs in the future, really engaging the decision maker in a deeper manner at the very beginning of the study. Well, and after that, there's the communications aspect. So we need to provide strong communications and follow up directed by the governments, but also the UNDP country office could play a significant role with senior management, at least at the deputy res rep level, in helping and facilitating the discussions. For example, most of the projects have, as I noted, policy reform components or governance components. So these TSA studies are normally not linked to those results of the project. So we need to implement persuasive communication campaigns with the result of the TSAs, both at the civil society and at the institutional level, to make sure that there is a follow-up. The new studies from 2020, 2019 to today, they include an action plan at the end of the study. So the action plan is agreed with the decision maker, and therefore there's a step-by-step follow-up to implement the policy recommendation. It also requires a budget to implementation. So for the implementation, so that's where the project comes in and can provide at least a part of the support needed to implement the recommendations. But that is the major challenge of the TSA, if the proper links are not made with the decision maker at the very beginning of the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. So in the interest of time, we will be finishing and wrapping up. I wanted to thank Marlon, Dorsla, and Miguel, and also Diana, who's not here with us, for their interventions. We will send out a post-workshop email with the handouts, so we have all the materials, and we will include the recording of Diana there. Thank you as well to everyone who has helped organizing this event, Jana, Federica, and to our interpreter, Kathy. And we invite you to join the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems digital platform. And we hope to see you at our last event for this year, which will happen on December 13th, and it will be a Tools and Solutions webinar on effective company actions in landscapes and jurisdictions, delivered by ICL. So thank you all, and hope to see you soon.